The moment I saw two strange cars parked beside my barn, I felt the air change. Not the way weather changes. The way a room changes when someone in it is lying. I had spent 31 years in homicide learning that feeling. Most people think danger announces itself loudly. It does not. It arrives in small things. A light left on at the wrong hour. A voice that sounds too steady. Two vehicles parked beside a barn on a property that should have been empty. I left my truck at the edge of the driveway instead of pulling up to the house. I set my bag on the seat and stepped out quietly. Then I moved along the tree line toward the back porch the way I used to approach houses where I did not know who was on the other side of the door. Old habits do not retire. They only wait. What I found on that porch would become the unraveling of the most calculated betrayal I had ever witnessed. And in 31 years of homicide, I had witnessed more than most people could stomach. But nothing prepares you for the moment you realize it came from inside your own family. That house was not just property. My wife and I had found it almost by accident. Back when retirement was still a distant word neither of us used in conversation. It sat outside Weaverville, North Carolina, tucked into the kind of mountain quiet that makes you unconsciously lower your voice. The farmhouse was old and tired, the roof soft in places, the porch sagging on the south side, the barn listing gently the way old structures do when they have held too much weight for too many seasons. Most people would have kept driving. My wife stepped out of the car, looked past the weeds and peeling paint, and said the house had good bones. I looked at the same structure and saw 6 years of weekends. Sore shoulders, hardware store receipts, and more voluntary labor than any sensible man should take on. I looked at it and thought about what it would cost to make it right. We bought it anyway. I rebuilt the place board by board. My wife stripped and refinished the hardwood floors herself, chose every color on every wall, and transformed the overgrown land behind the barn into something so unexpectedly beautiful that strangers would slow their cars in June just to look at her garden from the road. When I retired at 62, and she retired after 34 years in education, we finally moved there full-time. We were not frail. We were not waiting to be managed. We were two sharp, healthy people looking at 20 good years ahead. And the house we had spent 18 years earning was exactly where we wanted to spend them. Our son Tyler lived in Charlotte and worked in cybersecurity. Careful, preciso, and difficult to deceive for long. He was the kind of man who noticed when something did not add up and said nothing until he could prove it. Our daughter Allison lived in Atlanta with her husband. At the time, I told myself my unease about him was just an old detective's habit. That protective skepticism is a liability when your daughter is grown and your suspicion has no evidence behind it. I was wrong about that. The unease was not habit. It was a warning I had not yet learned to read. My son-in-law was the kind of man people trusted before they understood why. He remembered your drink order, your favorite team, the restaurant you mentioned once in passing 6 months earlier. He asked questions that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He smiled like he was sharing a private joke with you specifically. Even when he was only selling you the version of himself he had practiced in the mirror. He had worked in commercial real estate before the pandemic. Expensive watches, clean cars, easy confidence, and the kind of language about market trends that makes ordinary people mistake risk tolerance for intelligence. After the pandemic damaged his business, he moved into cryptocurrency investments. He described the pivot the way a man describes a gold mine he has already walked into. Every time he sat at my kitchen table and explained another opportunity, something in my chest went quiet and careful. Because I had spent 31 years listening to liars, and the dangerous ones were never the men who looked nervous. They were the calm ones, the ones whose tone stayed smooth even when the subject matter should have made them uncomfortable. The ones who never answered a direct question with a direct answer. I kept my doubts to myself. Allison was 34 when she married him. She worked in estate law. She understood contracts, knew how families turned on each other over money, and had spent her career watching greed dress itself up as care. I told myself she saw things I did not. I told myself every father distrusts the man his daughter chooses. I told myself wrong. The fishing trip was supposed to last 10 days. 4 retired lawmen. 1 cabin on the Watauga River. Cold mornings. Bad coffee. And enough quiet to convince ourselves the world ran fine without us. We had planned it for months. No cases. No phones ringing in the middle of the night. No, sitting under fluorescent lights watching someone construct a lie in real time. For 6 days it was exactly that. Every evening I called my wife. She was in Atlanta helping Allison recover from a knee procedure. Nothing serious. Just a surgery our daughter had put off too long. My wife sounded tired, but fine. Everything sounded normal. Then one of the men got a call that his mother had fallen. He packed up and left. I decided to go with him. I told myself it was practical. The trip had already changed shape. But that was not the whole reason. The whole reason was a feeling I'd carried since breakfast that day. A pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with altitude or coffee or age. The kind of quiet alarm that Homicide puts into you permanently. That goes off without explanation and has never once been wrong. So I drove home alone, through Asheville. The mountains were burning gold and red under an October sky that looked too blue to be real. By the time I reached my driveway, the feeling had sharpened into certainty. My wife's car was gone. As it should have been. The house lights were on at 2 in the afternoon, which made no sense. And beside my barn sat 2 vehicles. I had never seen a silver Mercedes and a dark blue pickup with contractor plates. I left my truck at the edge of the drive. I stepped out quietly, moved along the tree line, and came around the back of my own property the way I used to approach houses where I did not know what I would find on the other side. I found voices first. 3 people stood at the far end of my back porch. My daughter, her husband, and a man I had never seen before. Heavyset, maybe 60. Wearing the careful expression of someone who made his living sounding reasonable while discussing unreasonable things. He was holding blueprints. He pointed toward my barn. That structure needs to come down, he said. The acreage is what you're selling here. Buyers at this price point will want to demolish and build custom anyway. For a moment I did not move. My barn, my land, my porch, my daughter standing there like she belonged in a conversation about the demolition of the life her parents had spent 18 years building. She did not look comfortable. She looked like someone who had walked too far into a lie and could no longer find the door. Then my son-in-law said, "What is the timeline if we move forward after the assessment?" The developer answered without hesitation, 60 to 90 days for full transfer, depending on how clean the competency ruling comes through. Competency ruling. 2 words can change the temperature in your blood. My daughter said, "The assessment is scheduled for next Friday. The doctor is confident based on the history we provided." The history we provided. I stepped onto the porch. All 3 of them turned, and my daughter's face went pale before anyone spoke a word. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. My daughter looked at me the way a child looks when they have been caught doing something they do not yet have the courage to name. The developer lowered his blueprints and found something fascinating to study on the porch floor. My son-in-law recovered first. Men like him always do. He smiled, put both hands in his pockets, and gave me the same easy expression he had worn at Thanksgiving dinners and birthday calls when he wanted my wife to think he was a good husband. "We were just exploring options," he said, "looking at what the property might be worth someday. If you and Mom ever decided to downsize." "Downsize?" I said. He nodded slowly. With the particular patience of someone explaining something to a person who needs extra time with basic information. "You are not as young as you used to be. Winters up here can be hard. We have been concerned." That was the first mistake. A skilled liar can survive a bad story. What he cannot survive is overplaying sympathy. "I am 62. I said. "I ran a half marathon in April. Try again." His smile thinned. My daughter said quietly, "Dad, please, it is not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it looks like." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her eyes moved to her husband first. then away from me, toward the garden her mother had planted. So he spoke for her. "Your wife has been confused lately," he said. "Missing things, forgetting bills. And you have seemed scattered too. That does not mean anything terrible, but it means someone responsible should be thinking ahead." There it was. The soft language, the concerned tone, the careful reframing of ordinary age as something clinical, something that required management. Someone stepping in to help. "My wife handles our finances through autopay," I said. "Set up 3 years ago. The electric bill does not get missed unless someone cancels the automatic payment." His face did not change. That told me more than panic would have. Because guilty men who are frightened show it. Guilty men who are still committed to the plan stay very, very still. I looked from him to my daughter, then to the man holding the blueprints. And I understood for the first time that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan, already in motion, already past the stage where it could be explained away. I just did not yet know how far it had gone. My son-in-law stopped pretending after that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice in the way people do when they want to sound reasonable while saying something that isn't. "We found a specialist," he said, "a doctor who handles elder cognitive decline. He's going to perform a formal evaluation next Friday." "I have not agreed to any evaluation," I said. "You do not have to." The words landed quietly. He continued, "If the documentation supports the clinical picture, the court can appoint guardianship. For your protection, someone responsible has to be able to make decisions before things deteriorate further. For your protection." I had heard people in handcuffs use more honest language. I sat down in my own porch chair and looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were wet, but she was not denying any of it. That hurt more than anything he had said. "How much does he owe?" I asked. My daughter flinched. "This is not about money," he said. "Everything you just described is about money." I said, "You are trying to have your wife's parents declared incompetent, take legal control of our finances, and sell this land to cover a debt you created. So I will ask again. How much?" Nobody answered. The developer stared at the porch floor. I kept my voice completely flat, because anger gives desperate people something to fight against. Calm gives them nowhere to hide. Calm forces them to stand in the open with nothing between them and what they have done. I took out my phone and called Tyler. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did when my name appeared on his screen. "I need you to come to the house tonight," I said. "Bring your laptop." A pause, short and calibrated. "I'm leaving in an hour." I ended the call. My daughter's voice cracked. "Tyler does not need to be involved in this." "He became involved," I said, "the moment you started planning to take everything your mother and I built." My son-in-law gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "You are making a scene over nothing." "No," I said. "I am preserving one." The developer shifted against the railing and announced he should probably go. I looked at him. "You are standing in the middle of a conspiracy to commit fraud against 2 senior citizens. You can leave after I have your full contact information and a voluntary statement. If you cooperate now, your position looks very different than if I have to find you later." He sat back down. We waited for Tyler. Tyler arrived just before 11. He stepped onto the porch, looked at the developer with the blueprints in his lap, at his sister with her arms wrapped around herself, at his brother-in-law doing everything he could to look composed. Tyler looked at me once. Then he opened his laptop and said, "How long has this been going on?" He was asking me, but he already knew. 3 months, he said, and answered himself. My daughter made a soft sound like the air had been pressed out of her. Tyler looked tired, not triumphant. I did not say anything because I was not certain yet. I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. It was our joint checking account. The same account my wife and I had used for 30 years. Groceries. Utilities. The ordinary recurring expenses of an ordinary life. There were 3 withdrawals spread across 8 weeks. Not dramatic amounts. $1,600 total. Moved in increments designed to stay below the line where banks send alerts. Tyler clicked once. A shell company registration opened. The contact email belonged to my son-in-law. For the first time all evening, the polish came off his face completely. Those were legitimate transactions, he said. Tyler's voice stayed flat. No, they were not. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Not because I needed time to understand it. Because I already understood it completely. They had not started with the house. They had started with our grocery money. Small enough to go unnoticed. Small enough to feel out the door before walking through it. And once a thief learns, a door is unlocked. He always comes back looking for a bigger room. Then Tyler opened a second file. I called Dr. Brennan Whitfield this morning, he said. My son-in-law's head came up fast. Just a twitch. Just a quick tightening around the jaw. The kind of involuntary tell that 31 years in homicide teaches you to clock before the person speaking has finished their sentence. Tyler continued without looking at him. The real doctor. Whitfield practices in Charlotte. His office confirmed he has no record of either of you as patients. No consultation. No cognitive evaluation scheduled for next Friday. No contact from Allison or her husband regarding your mental condition. He has never been involved in this in any capacity. The porch went quiet enough that I could hear the field insects starting up across the yard. My daughter covered her mouth with one hand. As of this morning, Tyler said, Doctor, Whitfield is contacting his malpractice attorney because someone used his professional credentials without permission to prepare fraudulent medical documentation. My son-in-law said nothing. No smile this time. No concerned tone. No polished pivot toward family advocacy and difficult circumstances. Just a man standing in the open. The last version of himself he had prepared now useless. Tyler pulled up the power of attorney documents. At first pass, they looked clean. Professional formatting. Legal language positioned exactly where frightened, trusting people are supposed to stop reading and start signing. Tyler highlighted the critical sections. One clause waived our right to independent legal review before signing. One transferred decision-making authority with no defined end date. And one stated that if my wife or I later challenged the guardianship, that challenge could be treated as evidence of temporary cognitive clarity rather than proof of competence. I read that last line twice. If we stayed quiet, they won the property. If we objected, they could argue the objection was a symptom. The document was constructed to be airtight from the inside. Every exit had been blocked before we ever found the door. I set the laptop down and looked at my son-in-law. How much I asked Tyler. My son hesitated for half a second. That half second told me the number was worse than my daughter had been prepared to hear. $430,000. Tyler said. The number landed like something physical. My daughter lifted her head slowly. No. Crypto positions that went to zero across 14 months. Tyler said. Margin loans layered on top. 2 institutional lenders. 2 private individuals. One of them already has a civil judgment against him in Georgia. My daughter stared at her husband. You told me it was $200,000. He said nothing. She said it again. Softer. You told me it was $200,000. Still nothing. I watched my daughter understand the full truth in real time. It was one of the cruelest things I had ever witnessed. Not because she was innocent. She was not. She had stood on my porch while a stranger with blueprints discussed demolishing my barn. She had helped prepare paperwork designed to strip her parents of legal rights before they knew they had lost them. But in that moment, I saw the story she had been living inside collapse. She had told herself this was temporary. She had told herself they were only desperate. She had told herself she was protecting her marriage. The family. Everyone from a mess too ugly to speak aloud. Now she understood. Her husband had not only used us, he had used her too. And somehow that realization did not make her betrayal smaller. It only made the whole thing sadder. Then my daughter said something that changed the temperature of the entire night. I drugged Mom's tea. The porch went completely silent. I looked at her. She was staring at the table, both palms pressed flat against the wood, like she needed it to hold her upright. Sunday night, she said. I put her anxiety medication in her chamomile tea. She was getting upset about the papers. She kept asking questions about the power of attorney. She was about to call you. Allison paused. I told myself it was 1 milligram. I told myself she needed rest. I told myself it would not hurt her. My son-in-law said her name sharply. She did not look at him. I stood up and walked to the porch rail. I gripped it hard enough that my knuckles went white. In 31 years, I had heard confessions for things that should not be possible between human beings. I had sat across from people who had done the unthinkable to strangers. But nothing in 31 years had prepared me for hearing my own daughter explain that she had sedated her mother without her knowledge, so my wife would stop asking questions about the papers designed to take our home. On Sunday night, my wife had called me from Atlanta. She had sounded confused, tired, a little embarrassed that she could not keep track of what she had been saying. I told her to get some rest. I said I loved her. I did not know she had been sedated by the daughter she had once rocked through childhood fevers. I took out my phone and called my wife. When she answered, soft and sleepy, I told her I was home. I told her I needed her to drive back in the morning. I did not tell her why. Some truth should not be delivered over a phone. My son-in-law stood so quickly his chair scraped across the porch boards. This is getting out of hand, he said. We can work this out as a family. Nobody needs to involve anyone else. I looked at him for a long moment. It became a legal matter when you used a doctor's name to prepare fraudulent competency documents. I said, it became a criminal matter when my daughter medicated her mother without her consent. He moved toward the back door. Maybe to get inside. Maybe to retrieve something. Maybe because guilty men start moving when stillness gets too close. I stepped in front of him. I am 62 years old. Retired. Slower than I was at 35. But I had spent 4 years playing linebacker before I ever put on a badge. And 31 years after that, walking into rooms where people did not want me there. I have stood in front of men larger and more desperate than my son-in-law and held my ground without raising my voice. He stopped. Sit back down, I said. He sat. Then I called the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. The deputy arrived after 2 in the morning. Calm. Methodical. Exactly the kind of officer you want in a situation already dense with emotion. She separated everyone. Took statements individually. Reviewed Tyler's documentation. And made 2 calls from my kitchen. Then she walked back to the porch and informed my son-in-law that he was being detained. Wire fraud. Elder financial exploitation. Identity theft. Criminal conspiracy. My daughter sat at the kitchen table and said nothing. After the patrol car disappeared down the driveway, the house went quiet in the way that follows something irreversible. Not silence. Not something heavier than silence. Tyler made coffee because none of us knew what else to do. We sat at the table where my daughter had done spelling homework and cried over algebra and eaten pancakes her mother shaped into animals because she believed childhood should include small miracles when possible. Now Allison sat at that same table, grown, and looked at the wood grain like it might offer her something the night had not. I knew it was wrong. She finally said, all of it. From the beginning. I knew. I said nothing. He kept saying we were out of options, that it was temporary, that once the property sold, we could pay everything back before you and Mom ever found out. She pressed her hands flat on the table. He said it was better than public shame. Better than people coming after us. Tyler leaned back in his chair. My daughter looked at me. I saw a woman who had finally run out of excuses to stand behind. I let myself believe him, she said, because the alternative was admitting I had married a man who would do something like this. That explains why you stayed, I said. It does not explain why you helped. Her face came apart. I was scared, she said. The words sat in the air for a moment. Then she shook her head. as if she could hear herself. "No," she whispered. "That is not enough." She wiped her face with both hands. I was a coward. I was ashamed. And I told myself that protecting him was the same as protecting the family. I looked at my daughter for a long time. "You will tell the prosecutor everything," I said, "including what you gave your mother." She nodded. "I know." Before dawn, she left with the name of a criminal defense attorney written on the back of a gas receipt by her brother. No hug. No goodbye. Just consequences. My wife came home at 10 the next morning. I heard her car on the gravel before I saw it. I stepped outside before she parked. For a moment, she just sat behind the wheel, looking at the house, then at me. She knew, not the details, not yet, but after 39 years. A woman knows when her husband is carrying something that could not fit through a phone line. I opened her door. She stepped out and came into my arms. I held her in the pale October light, with the mountains behind us and the house we had nearly lost standing quiet at our backs. I wanted, for one impossible second, to leave the truth outside, to let her come in, make coffee, talk about the drive and the surgery and whether I had caught anything worth mentioning. But that world was already gone. So I told her. I told her about the cars, the developer, the blueprints for the barn, the fake cognitive assessment, the doctor whose name had been borrowed for fraud, the papers designed to strip our rights before we knew we were losing them. Then I told her about the tea. She stopped moving. She did not cry. My wife had spent 34 years running a school through budget cuts and grief and every kind of human crisis that walks through a principal's office. She had learned how to stand still when standing still was the only thing keeping a room from fracturing. She asked 2 questions. Is she safe? And then, did she tell the truth? I answered both. My wife nodded once, slow and final. Then she looked at our house and said, "Let's go inside. I'll make breakfast." That was not forgiveness. That was survival. The weeks that followed moved the way weather moves when there is nothing you can do to stop it. You wake up, you look at the sky, and you know a storm is coming whether you are ready or not. The charges against my son-in-law came first. Wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, identity theft, criminal conspiracy. When Tyler's digital documentation cleared forensic review, the district attorney added a further charge connected to the unauthorized transactions from our account. The fraudulent medical paperwork was referred separately to the state medical board. The real doctor, Whitfield, from what I was told, was furious in the cold, precise way professional men get angry when their name has been used as a tool. My daughter cooperated with the prosecutor fully. She gave the timeline, the conversations, the pressure from her husband, the documents she had reviewed, the meeting on our porch, the lies they had prepared about our mental condition. She described every step clearly and without softening the language. And she disclosed what she had put in her mother's tea. That part cost her the most. The prosecutor could have charged her with multiple offenses. Instead, because her cooperation was complete and documented, they offered a different path. Full testimony against her husband. No contact with us unless we allowed it. Mandatory counseling. Restitution where possible. And participation in a restorative justice program specifically designed for family-involved elder exploitation cases. Some people later told me that was mercy. Maybe it was. But mercy does not mean nothing happened. Mercy means you are still required to stand in front of the damage you caused and say its name out loud. In January, Allison stood in a fluorescent-lit room in Asheville at a community forum on elder abuse prevention. 30 people sat in folding chairs. Social workers, police liaison, advocates, a few local reporters, and couples old enough to have adult children managing their lives without being asked. My wife and I sat in the second row. Our daughter stood at the front with one sheet of paper in her hand. She never looked at it. My name is Allison, she said. My husband and I attempted to have my parents declared legally incompetent so we could take control of their property and use it to cover $430,000 in debt. Nobody moved. My parents are not incompetent. My father is a retired homicide detective. My mother is a retired school principal. They are sharp, capable, and fully able to manage their own lives. I told myself we were helping them. The truth is, I needed money and chose to betray them instead of asking for help. Her voice changed slightly when she continued. I also put a sedative in my mother's tea without her knowledge or consent. There is no version of that sentence that becomes acceptable. I have tried every explanation I can construct. Fear, shame, pressure, marriage. None of them change what I did. She looked directly at her mother when she said it. My wife's hand found mine. Allison warned every person in that room to examine the moment they begin seeing aging parents as assets or obstacles or future inheritance, rather than as human beings who are still entirely themselves. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds longer than applause usually takes to start. In the car afterward, my wife said, "She sounded like herself." I nodded, but sounding like herself did not undo what she had done. We both understood that. My son-in-law went to trial in March. The story was public record by then. Not national news. Not the kind of thing people track from other states. But in our county, in our corner of the Blue Ridge, people knew enough to lower their voices when they saw us in a parking lot. He came into the courtroom wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who still believed he could explain his way out of consequence. His attorney was skilled. Good attorneys do not need innocent clients. They need angles, doubts, technicalities, and enough fog to make 12 people hesitate. He tried everything. He suggested the bank withdrawals had been misunderstood. He suggested the meeting on our porch was only preliminary and exploratory. He suggested the cognitive assessment had been a protective family measure rather than fraud. He suggested my daughter was emotional, unreliable, and had exaggerated under pressure. But paper does not get emotional. Bank records do not panic on the witness stand. Email headers do not forget what they say. Tyler's documentation was clean, organized, and thorough in the way that 31 years in homicide taught me to recognize as ironclad. Every wire transfer, every shell company connection, every draft document, every timestamp. My son had built the kind of case I used to dream about handing to a prosecutor quiet. Complete. And immune to charm. Then Dr. Brennan Whitfield testified. He was angry in the controlled way that educated men get angry when their name has been used to legitimize something filthy. He told the jury he had never examined my wife or me, had never scheduled any assessment, had never authorized his credentials to be used in any guardianship proceeding, and had never spoken with my son-in-law or daughter about our cognitive condition under any circumstances. That was the moment. The jury took 7 hours. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, my son-in-law stared straight ahead as if the courtroom itself had failed him. The judge sentenced him to 8 years. She spoke about the deliberate nature of the scheme, the fraudulent medical documents, the systematic financial exploitation, the cruelty of targeting people who had welcomed this man into their family and trusted him with their daughter. My wife and I held hands through all of it. When it was over, we walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon. The house was still ours. The land was still ours. And for the first time in months, I could breathe without that pressure in my chest. My wife and I did not go straight home after the sentencing. We walked 2 blocks from the courthouse to a small diner with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. It was 2 in the afternoon. Too late for the breakfast crowd. Too early for dinner. We ordered pancakes. Neither of us explained why. We did not need to. After everything that had happened, pancakes felt like something ordinary enough to be a small act of grace. My wife poured syrup over hers with a steady hand. "The house is ours," she said. "The land too," I said. She looked out the window for a moment. "And the barn." That made me smile for the first time all day. Spring came soon after. bright and sudden the way it always does in the Blue Ridge. My wife planted the garden in the second week of April, earlier than usual, as if she needed to put her hands in the soil and remind it that we were still here. I repaired the south fence. Tyler drove up with his family for Easter. His children ran across the yard in the cold sunlight, laughing too hard to be careful about where they were stepping. My wife chased them and deliberately failed to catch them. Nothing was fully healed. Our daughter was still gone. The letter had not come yet. There were rooms in our hearts we were not ready to open. But the house stood. The garden came in green. The mountain air moved through the windows each morning. Coffee still tasted like coffee. And sometimes, when people try hard enough to take your whole life apart, ordinary things become evidence that they failed. The letter came in May. My wife found it in the mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a seed catalog and the electric bill. No return address, but we both recognized the handwriting before either of us said our daughter's name. For a while, it just sat on the kitchen table. My wife stood beside it with one hand resting on the back of a chair. I stood near the sink. She is in therapy. My wife said, "You do not know that." "I do," she said. Not because she had read the letter, because mothers sometimes understand the shape of things before proof arrives. I did not argue. Outside, the garden was coming in. The tomatoes were already staked. The beans had begun to climb. Everything on that mountain seemed determined to keep growing, whether our family was ready or not. My wife picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back down. "I am not ready," she said. "I know." She looked at me then, and I saw how tired she was. Not physically. My wife could still work circles around people half her age. This was the deeper kind of tired. The kind that comes from loving someone who hurt you, and not knowing where that love is supposed to live now. "Do you think you ever will be?" she asked. I looked out at the yard, toward the spot where our daughter had once helped me pull old fence posts when she was 18. Complaining the whole first hour, then getting stubborn about doing the job right. She had been filthy and proud by sundown. Already talking about planting tomatoes in the spring. We had planted tomatoes every year after that. "Maybe not today," I said. My wife nodded. Then she carried the letter to the small basket on the porch, where she kept things she was not finished with yet. Not opened. Not thrown away. Still present. My son-in-law's greatest mistake was not the fraudulent documents. It was not the stolen grocery money. Not the fake doctor. Not the blueprints. Not the plan to have us declared incompetent so he could sell the land beneath our feet. His greatest mistake was looking at two retired people on a mountain farm and seeing weakness. He saw 62 and thought slow. He saw retirement and thought passive. He saw a farmhouse and imagined two people quietly fading into the background of their own lives, waiting for younger hands to take over. He had not done his research. You do not survive 31 years in homicide by missing what is right in front of you. You do not sit across from liars and killers and grieving families and men with perfect smiles without learning the difference between concern and calculation. You do not spend 39 years in a marriage without knowing the sound of fear in your wife's voice even when she says she is fine. And you do not spend 6 years rebuilding a house board by board, carrying every beam and fitting every frame, only to sit quietly while some desperate man with charm and debt calls it an asset. He thought my patience meant I had not noticed. That was his second mistake. Patience is not passivity. Patience is watching, listening, letting a liar keep talking until he builds the walls of his own cage with his own words. Patience is staying still when anger tells you to move, waiting until the shape of the whole thing becomes visible, then acting once, cleanly, with everything you need. I drove home early because my body knew before my mind could articulate it. I walked around my own property like a detective, approaching a scene because 31 years of instinct had not quit just because I had. He thought our age made us vulnerable. But age had given us what he never developed: discipline, endurance, memory, and the kind of absolute calm that frightens people who depend on panic to control the room. The house was still ours. The land was still ours, and we were still entirely ourselves. That evening in June, my wife fell asleep in her chair on the porch. Her wine glass tilted, and I took it before it could slip. Then I pulled the old blanket from my armrest and laid it across her knees. She settled deeper into sleep without waking. The mountains had gone dark by then. Not invisible. Just present the way old things are present. Large and quiet, and unimpressed by whatever trouble people create inside their own small lives. I sat beside her and listened to the field. There is a kind of silence in the mountains that is not really silence. Crickets. Leaves. Wind moving through the upper tree line. The breathing of the woman who had stood beside me for 39 years and still chose to make breakfast the morning after learning what her daughter had done. I thought about forgiveness. Not the easy kind. Not the kind people describe when nothing has cost them anything. I mean the kind that requires time, truth, distance, and more strength than anger ever asked for. Our daughter's letter was still in the basket on the porch table. Unopened. Not thrown away. Waiting. That felt honest. Some stories do not end with every wound healed. Some end with the house still standing and the garden still coming in, and the people who were supposed to be broken still sitting quietly in the dark. Breathing together. Holding what is theirs. Tomorrow there would be coffee. Morning light on the mountains. Another ordinary day we had worked hard enough to keep, and for now, that was enough. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed quiet and gathered proof the way he did, or would you have confronted them the moment you stepped onto that porch? And if you believe that patience is the most powerful form of justice, subscribe to Reddit Revenge for more stories about betrayal, survival, and the quiet kind of karma that always arrives exactly when it should.